All right, now we're finally at the portion of the class when we're actually going to start writing and working towards our final essay, which is the culminating project for the semester. So we want to always start with our thesis statement, which is kind of the roadmap for what we're going to be talking about and arguing in our essays. We never want to start writing an essay without some kind of plan or guide for what we want to talk about. I know so many of you are going to be like, I just sit down and start typing and writing and the ideas just come to me. But I promise you that your ideas sound very jumbled because you don't have this plan or a clear idea of what your argument is or what you want to be arguing throughout your essay. You should have been taught this in the argumentation section of Comp 1 if you took it at ETSU. Um, you should already have a pretty good knowledge since you're in Comp 2, which is part 1 of the composition sections, of what a thesis statement is, what its function is, and how it should sound and what it does in the essay. But I kind of want to go over a little bit of a review since it's been a few weeks since last semester, or it may have been a little while since you've taken Comp 1 or been in a high school English class. So let's kind of dive in and discuss what a thesis statement is, what its function is, and how it should look in this essay. So, a thesis statement has ancient Greek roots. If you ever had a class with me, you know I like to talk about the etymology of words, which is kind of what words mean and where they come from. The word thesis means setting down or placing. So essentially, we can kind of look at our thesis statement as placing or setting down your readers into your central argument with one single statement or idea. Your thesis statement should not be longer than one complete sentence. You should be able to sum up the entirety of your argument in that one single sentence. It's kind of like elevator pitching something to someone. If you don't know what an elevator pitch is, essentially, if we were in an elevator together and we were riding up from the first floor up to the fifth floor or something like that, if you can't explain to me what your essay is arguing by the time we get to that floor, it probably lacks a clear focus. You really want to make it concise and clear with what you're arguing. Um, and if you can't really sum up the central or main idea of your paper in one sentence, it probably lacks a clear focus. That's also an area of revision that we might want to work towards. And also, while you're turning in your thesis statements to me first, so that way I can give you ample feedback before you start writing the essay. Because I never want you to start writing the essay with a incomplete or a thesis statement that isn't making an argument or something like that, because that's a waste of your time, right? So we want to make sure first that thesis statement is solid and concise and has a clear argument before we even start writing our papers. Like I said, it's clear, it's concise, everything is contained within that one sentence, and it also has to be arguable. For example, your thesis statement can't be something like Batman is a superhero. That's not an argument, that's a fact, right? So we want to make sure that we're actually presenting an argument in our essay, which is something that can be debated. But you also want to make sure that you have clear evidence from your narrative to back up what you're arguing. You know, we can't claim, I'm trying to think of an example. I have no idea. I can't come up with an example off the top of my head. But we want to make sure that what you are arguing is actually debatable. Um, but those clear pieces of evidence do come from your narrative. Your thesis statement also should appear in the introduction of the essay, which is the very first paragraph. We're going to be doing a review of essay structures a little later on in the next couple of weeks after we talk about research. Your thesis statement should be the very last sentence of your first paragraph. That way, it sets up your reader for what you're going to be talking about in the rest of your essay. It's very clear from the very beginning what your argument actually is in your essay. So, a well crafted thesis identifies not only the main idea of your essay, but the scope of the discussion. So, it should be 3 points minimum typically. So, a general thesis statement should consist of your argument plus the three main points of your discussion in the rest of your essay. So, essentially, if we're looking at it like 4 parts, so you have that first part, which is your main argument. Then you have three pieces of evidence from the narrative that back up what your argument is. And let's look at this a little bit. So here's an example. Here's an example of a thesis statement. In The Walking Dead, the relentless pursuit of survival in a post-apocalyptic world becomes a metaphor for the human condition, exploring themes of morality, community, and the gray area between zombie and human, ultimately questioning what it means to be human in the face of zombie apocalypse. So here we can kind of break down each part of this thesis statement. The argument here is that in The Walking Dead, the relentless pursuit of survival in a post-apocalyptic world becomes a metaphor for the human condition. That's your argument, right? But in our thesis statement, we also want to make sure that we're using those 3 points. So the 3 points here, point one, following that argument, this should always follow your argument, is that it explores themes of morality, that it explores themes of community, and discusses the gray area between zombie and human. Now, of course, I've tacked on a little bit more at the end here, but those should be the main basic points of what your thesis statement should do. And in the requirement sheet for your thesis proposal, I've given you some other examples for specific ones for this class since we're using our cultural lenses of what a thesis statement could look like with those 3 points. You don't have those 3 points, it's missing something. You want to be sure that each of those 3 points is present because otherwise you're not going to have enough room to write a 10-page paper, right? So I want to go over this as well. These are things that I will be taking points off for in Comp 2, just because you should have already learned this in Comp 1, but I'm going over a review of it now, so you really know it. Do not use these in your thesis statement. Never start your thesis statement with, in this essay, I will. Now, what's wrong with this? Of course, it's using that personal pronoun I. You never ever want to say the word I, my, me, we, those kinds of words in your thesis statements. It's just not academic level writing. You also never want to say things like, this essay aims to, I am arguing that, my argument is. Just present it to us. I'll know that it's the thesis statement just by reading it because you have that argument plus your 3 points. It should be very clear to me what the thesis statement is without saying my argument is blank, 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 right? Just say it. I know it might seem like it's going to seem very stiff and formal and like very academic, but that's the point. We want to make sure that we're getting rid of these kind of high school level writing techniques and diving into more college level writing skills. So, like I said, I know many of you all are the type of people who just sit down and start writing, and the argument just quote unquote comes to you as you write. But we don't want to do that when we write. And why is that? It's kind of like your thesis statement is kind of like the roadmap for the structure of the essay. Ultimately, it helps you. It's not so much that you're telling me what your essay is about. Because it should be, obvious by me reading it what your essay is about, but it ultimately helps you plan the rest of your paper. Because if you have that clear argument plus the 3 points that you're making, it should be very clear to yourself where the direction of your paper is headed. You have that main argument that you keep referring back to, that is the sole focus of your paper, but then you have those 3 points of evidence that will make up each of your 3 body paragraphs. So it kind of helps you with a clear focus and direction of where you're taking your paper. It's a roadmap. It's a game plan. If we want to think about this in football terms, football players never, start a game without some kind of plan for action, right? There's always a plan for action. We never just want to jump into it and, good luck, hope for the best, hope we figure it out along the way. We always want to start with that roadmap or that plan so that we have a very clear idea of what the structure of your essay will be. All right, so if you're not a literature person or you're not interested in these kinds of things, you might not know what to write about, even after reading through and listening to the lectures on the cultural lenses that we've talked about. So you could do one of two things. You could either start with a cultural lens that you think is really interesting and then relate a narrative to that cultural lens, or you could start with the narrative and then find a cultural lens that matches it, or that you can find pieces of evidence from the narrative. So, for example, you could start with your favorite movie. So think of your favorite movie of all time right now. All right, so start by writing down a few questions you have about the narrative. So it doesn't have to be necessarily about the cultural lenses yet. Just write down some things you're curious about the narrative. What makes the narrative click? Does it come with that 3-part structure? Is there clearly a beginning, middle, and end to the plot? And what are those specific instances? What dynamics are interesting? Is there a hero or a villain? Um, is there a female character? What dynamics are interesting? What do you want to know more about? Because, of course, this class is also focused on research. What do you want to know more about in this narrative? And then, of course, relating it back to the cultural lenses, what cultural lenses could actually be applied to this narrative? Then, once you have those questions, answer your question. Each of those answers, then, with a little bit of tweaking, could become your thesis statement. And that's kind of one way that you can figure out what you want to write about without it just, light bulb coming to you. Start by asking questions and then answer those questions about the narrative, and then that might help you form an argument towards what you actually want to be writing about. So here's another example of a thesis statement. Gilmore Girls explores feminism and the concept of womanhood through its emphasis on female relationships, such as between Lorelai and Rory, inclusion of female characters with agency and autonomy, and discussions between characters of the challenges women face. This has that four-part structure. So your argument here, the main argument of your paper here would be Gilmore Girls explores feminism, there's your cultural lens, and the concept of womanhood through its emphasis on female relationships. Then, of course, we always want to follow that with our three parts. So, emphasis on female relationships, inclusion of female characters, and discussions between characters of the challenges women face. One way this can help you see if you have all four parts of your thesis statement is after you type it out or write it down, highlight in different colors each part of the sentence. And then that'll help you see, do I actually have 3 points of evidence from the narrative? Do I actually have an argument? And those kinds of things. I always find highlighting and actually being able to visualize and see the parts of the sentence to be really helpful when I'm breaking down an argument. Here's another example here. Bruce Wayne in Batman Begins is the embodiment of Freud's ideas of childhood trauma and repression, which leads Wayne to create the identity of Batman, seek revenge against criminals, and use fear as a weapon. See, but we also started with a question. So, how can Bruce Wayne and Batman Begins represent Freudian psychology? That might be a question that you asked when you were watching the movie, for example, and then you answer it with your thesis statement. So, let's break this down. Here's that thesis statement one more time. Bruce Wayne in Batman Begins is the embodiment of Freud's ideas of childhood trauma and repression, which leads Wayne to create the identity of Batman, seek revenge against criminals, and use fear as a weapon. So that four-part structure is also seen here again. That first part of your argument, so the main argument of your whole entire essay is going to be Bruce Wayne in Batman Begins is the embodiment of Freud's ideas of childhood trauma and repression. If we look back to the beginning of this PowerPoint, what a good thesis statement does is it should be arguable, right? This is an arguable statement. This is not something that is explicitly said to us throughout the narrative. This is a theory. This is an argument that you are making based on what you've seen throughout the narrative. I could argue the exact opposite of this and say that he's not the embodiment of Freud's ideas of childhood trauma and repression. Of course, if I could find evidence in the narrative to back it up. But if this is this is your argument, it is a good argument because it's not just a fact or it's not just stating something, but it's actually arguable, and you'll be able to really dive deep and explore what you were arguing here. And then, of course, this thesis statement also has the 3 points that back it up. So the 3 points of evidence that you will use throughout your essay is that he creates the identity of Batman, uses fear as a weapon, and seeks revenge against criminals. So you also have those 3 points that back up your argument. Now, when you're doing the thesis proposal, I want you all to do something like this first before you turn it in to me. Yeah, you don't have to turn in this practice, but make sure that you're actually either highlighting or breaking it down in the visual way that I've shown here with the 1, 2, 3 numbered list to make sure that you actually have 3 points of evidence and your main argument in one sentence. Of course, since this is an online class, I do want to make it clear that the use of AI in my classroom will not be tolerated under any circumstances. There is an AI detector on Turnitin, and I do use it to, as evidence if it says like 70% AI generated, then of course that's a cause for me to email you. But also, I can just easily tell with the way that ChatGPT and other AI services, even if you use an AI scrambler, um, how it words things. So even if you use it to just generate an argument of your essay, trust me, I know what it sounds like, and it doesn't sound like a person. So I'm really interested in hearing what you are interested in and what you think is interesting and arguable in your favorite movie, TV show, or video game, or a narrative you found interesting, or one of the cultural lenses you found the most interesting. I'm so much more interested in hearing what you think is cool about these things rather than a robot. I would rather have a mediocre essay than a quote perfect essay from a robot 100%. um but also on a more serious note, there are students last semester who got expelled, yes, as in completely kicked out of ETSU because they used AI on essay assignments. So don't be dumb. Make sure you're not actually using AI on these. I know it's really tempting to do in an online class, but please don't do it. Please actually do the work. You could very much regret it if you don't. Like I said, I'm not trying to scare you by saying people got expelled. I'm just trying to be realistic and tell you that yes, I have seen students get expelled from literature professors or English professors because they use ChatGPT. So that is definitely banned in our class, and do not do it. But that being said, like I said, I'm genuinely excited to see what you all are interested in writing about. Every time I teach this class, I get such interesting topics, such absolutely interesting arguments. Arguments that I would never consider applying like this cultural lens to this movie, for example. But I always learn something from this class. So this is definitely the most fun part of the class for me is seeing what you all are interested in writing about. Um, of course, if you have any questions before the thesis proposal is due, feel free to email me. But I will also be giving you ample feedback on those thesis proposal drafts so I can make sure that you're, actually have a good thesis statement before you start writing your essay because I don't want to put you out in the weeds without um, actually giving you some advice, some feedback for what your argument could be. The specific dates and instructions are posted on the assignment sheet on D2L for those thesis proposals, but if you have any questions in the meantime before that's due, please feel free to email me.